Welcome back, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us. And today we have an Independence Day special. First of all, I would like to welcome everyone who has been supporting us over our numerous season. And in our this season also, it's nothing less than a support. I'll request you, if you find our show that is adding value to you and to the people around you, I'll highly encourage you to comment in the chat box and to also share our show and subscribe to our channel. For those of you who are aware or who are aware about the format of our show, just a refresher, the theme of our show is Stories of Opportunity, where we invite curated speakers who speak about how they created their opportunity, how they clubbed their passion with their paycheck, and also giving back to the society, supporting the society members. Our today's show is nothing less. In our today's show, we have got a wonderful speaker, Anamika Haridas. And Anamika Haridas is a stand up comedian based out of Pune. And today we are going to delve into the mind of a stand up comedian. Anamika would be sharing with us what all goes into her mind when she comes up with a script and how is she enjoying her work. In addition to that, what else she does and what is the best part about it. So if you have been thinking about stand up comedy as a career, this is your opportunity to learn. And for those of you who are not aware and are tuning in for the first time in our show, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Aditya Sisodia. I'm an internationally certified coach and a mentor, and I support organizations and leaders with performance transformation. If you would like to know more, visit my website, www.coachsisodia.com. So that's enough about me. And let's roll the intro and let's see our speaker on the other side. Hey, Anamika, how are you?
Hi, Aditya. I'm all good. How are you? Thanks so much for having me.
I'm awesome. It's my sheer pleasure to host you because we have a background story which we would be sharing it in a while during our conversation, how exactly we connected. But before that, I hope everyone is safe around you and you had a fantabulous Independence Day.
Yes, happy Independence Day. All good here. Very patriotic.
Great, great, great. So, Anamika, I just kept it a secret for our listeners and our viewers. I would invite you to share a bit about yourself because I feel I'll do uh, injustice to your true potential, to what are the various activity you do, because going through your Instagram and through your other work on YouTube, listening to your interview, you do a lot of things. Please share a bit with our viewers.
Thanks, Aditya. So, yes, jack of all trades, master of none yet. But right now, okay, so I'm Anamika. As you can tell by the title, I'm a stand up comedian. So, I've been performing stand up since 2017. So, it's been almost 3 years now. Although the last year has been all Zoom shows. So, now I'm a Zoom comic as well. But aside from that, I'm a content manager for a startup in Bangalore. And so I have that's my day job, and I've been pursuing a stand up on the side as well. So that's what I do. A lot of my jokes oscillate between observational and anecdotal and dark. So that's what I prefer, and I mostly perform in Pune and Bombay. So that's okay.
Wow, wow. And in addition to that, Anamika, you're also an avid traveler because going through few of your snaps, I could realize that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I love travel, but no travel in the last 2 years for sure. Just staying
Hmm.
home and staying safe.
Hmm. So great, great, great. So tell me something, Anamika, with your permission. We are starting with a show, and as I mentioned, we are going to have some Q&A from our audience, and I have curated few questions. So my first question to you is, why did you choose this topic for our today's conversation?
So I think following your own path is something that's easier said than done, because a lot of us tend to,
Mhm.
have these inspirational posters around saying, yes, be in, be yourself, believe in yourself, follow your own path, these kind of things. But I
Mhm.
mean, like practically speaking, a lot of us tend to like hesitate when it comes to actually doing what we want. And usually what tends to happen is you kind of have an inkling of what you want to try and what you want to do, but you always have these obstacles in your own head, which are mostly like self-limiting and self-created, where you've decided, I mean, I'm sure there are circumstances as well, but in a lot of cases we tend to like be like, oh, but we can't do that, oh, only this kind of a person can do that and I'm not this kind of person. So we tend to kind of put ourselves down, and as a result we don't put ourselves out there and try, and and give ourselves the freedom to fail, because that's something that we're taught is so it's such a horrible thing, but it's actually such, it just means that you tried, and that's an important thing. So when it comes to following your own path, I feel like when you find something that you really enjoy doing, I'm sure you would also relate to this, Aditya, like how you found yourself doing this and enjoying this. I'm sure the moment you realize that you really like it, you kind of wanted to have started earlier. So whenever I see comedians who are younger than me, I'm always like, damn it, I should have started then. Even though I knew that I wanted to, but there was always something limiting, like, oh, I'm in college. Who's going to want to listen to like a 19-year-old rant on stage about something? But the fact remains that, yeah, other 19-year-olds. So you're always going to have an audience regardless of what you do. So you should just go ahead and do it without fear.
Amazing, amazing. And since you spoke about the younger audience, let me reverse the table. Is age really a bar? What are your thoughts?
In stand up specifically or in
In
life?
in stand-up and definitely in life also, what would you say? What are your thoughts?
Well, Aditya, so I am going to be turning 26 in 3 days. So I'm currently going through a mini existential crisis on being on the wrong side of 20 now and not having accomplished everything that I've wanted to. But to answer your question, I think practically speaking, age should not be a limiting factor, regardless of whether you're like 18 or 65. In our field especially, like, you find a lot of, I mean, you find a lot of young comics, but you also find a lot of old comics, and the fact remains that what I found in my very limited experience doing this is that everyone has an audience. So like that you're gonna find, and it's not just about stand up, it's about everything. If you're an artist, you're gonna find your audience. You're gonna find like those three people who really enjoy your paintings, and they're going to tell everyone else. So these kind of age is not a limiting factor at all. It's just that society is set up in a certain way that we perceive it as such, and there are like a lot of social things that do tend to make it a limiting factor. But if you want to do something, the best time is now.
Great, great, great. And speaking on the same lines, I would like to understand from you what advice from your experience would you like to give to a smart, driven individual about the real world, and what advice to ignore in terms of what we see, like in the backstage, we were discussing this thing that you have to go through a lot of uh, brainstorming just to come up with a fresh idea. You are not exactly aware which of your line would get wooed or booed. So what's your two cents around this?
Okay, so in terms of, let me answer in parts. So, what advice would you give to a smart driven individual about the real world, and what to ignore? I would say just, this is something that we stand up say in stand up, which is basically we give our newer comics advice, and then we're like, don't follow the advice of any comics. So I think this kind of applies to life as well, where everyone has a different lived experience than you, and everyone has different factors that either oppress them or work to their advantage. So you're not going to be able to get customized advice for you unless it's from yourself, and that's only going to happen if you try more things. So I would say that at the risk of sounding very like it sounding like a comedic answer, I would actually say just ignore all advice. But the only advice that you should probably do, I mean, like you should probably listen to, is to listen to yourself. And kind of what really helps me out is like maybe journaling and things like that. So if I'm in a similar situation, I'll go back to my notes and see how I felt in a specific time, and then feel like, okay, this is what I can apply to my situation, or I'll look back on my memories and see. So as someone who's also a younger sibling, I get a ton of advice from my older sister, my parents, my friends who are more experienced than me. So ultimately you're only going to learn by making your own mistakes. So, and again, it comes back to this whole um, inhibition and fear of failure, which is so ingrained in all of us. So I think just do is what I would say, which is also advice, but don't take it.
Great, great. And what exactly to ignore?
I would say just ignore all advice that you feel is not advice that's applicable to you. There are all these inspirational cat posters everywhere, like persistent things. Sometimes you shouldn't persist. Like, you know what I mean? You should draw boundaries sometimes. So it all depends on you and what you need in that specific situation. So that's what I would say.
Great, great, great. And Anamika, tell me, how do you keep yourself emotionally charged? Because there is a lot of peer pressure, popularity, uh, so many comedians, because we only remember those comedians who have signed a contract with Amazon or Netflix for their series or something. So, how exactly, because you mentioned about journaling,
Mm.
are there any other ways how you keep yourself grounded and how you keep yourself uh, sane?
Oh, honestly, I think it takes some time, especially like when you're just out of college, you're still discovering who you are. You don't necessarily like you need to be a little bit crazy to do that. So I would say there are a lot of grounding things to do. I mean, not that I'm like as in I'm not an expert on this, but I would say just one thing that really helps is going back to your childhood hobbies. Those are the things that kind of tend to you go into that state of flow. So for me, maybe I like writing, so that's what I do. But somebody else may just like playing music or these kind of things. So these are the kind of things that keep you grounded. And plus I think like just having a good grounded friend circle is, I don't know if this is really relevant, but I think those are things that kind of tie you together. And yeah.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you really resonate with what Anamika is saying, I would highly encourage you to comment in the chat box and to also hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It encourages us to bring in more line of speakers who are just like Anamika, who are sharing it direct from their heart. And you never know, these words might inspire someone in your family, in your circle. Now, the intention of asking you this thing, Anamika, is because this is the exact next question that I had curated for you. What is your life mantra in regards to high performance?
Just practice. That's it. Like if you I think a lot of us tend to not, we kind of have an inkling of what we want to do. So I think what tends to happen is you try a bunch of things, right? And then you see that, okay, I like this, this, and this. And then you kind of decide that, okay, I'm going to put my energy into these three things. But what tends to happen is, and what we kind of fail to understand, especially when we're young and excited about everything, is that you can't do everything at once. Okay, life is long. You are going to be able to do everything in your life, but you're not going to be able to do it all at once. So I would say, like, even for example, when I started stand up, which is very interesting because I was someone who was, I wanted to do it earlier, but I was also very into music. So, but that 1 year, and I didn't even realize this because it went by like without me even realizing, I put all my focus into not just performing on stage, or writing, but also just listening to stand up material. And so much so that I would actually like sit in my office when it's more free time, and I would like watch specials or just listen to other comedians talk about being comedians and learn more about the craft. And that was something that I genuinely enjoyed. And it was only around 7, 8 months in, I realized I hadn't listened to a single song actively,
Wow.
which was just, yeah, it was crazy to me. And I realized it only 7 months later, going from someone who, listens to music every day and it's a part of their daily rituals and life and something that's so important. My entire It became kind of like an obsession listening to stand-up material and stand-up related things. So I think, but the one big takeaway is that entire period of 6 months or like 7 months in the beginning, it was a huge learning curve, because it's like with any new job, right? The advice that you get, it's like you're gonna um, it takes 1 year to actually be good at any job. So it's kind of like that with an art as well. You don't all you're gonna uh, How you're going to be able to get good at it is by being obsessed. So you're going to have to put all your time and energy into it, and you're not going to be able to do that if you have a bunch of other things that you're taking care of. Later on, once you kind of absorb the craft, you're able to balance other things out. And eventually I brought music back into my life, but it took time. And I think that's what I want to highlight over here. The only mantra that you can follow is just practice. Do the same routine thing 100 times. We have this thing called, you can feel free to step in anytime here, Aditya.
Sure,
I'm just
sure, sure,
so
sure, sure, sure.
but in like there is this technique called morning pages that a lot of writers and artists use, which is basically you get up in the morning, and I think this is beneficial for anyone just to stay in touch with their feelings and, like you said, be grounded. Is you wake up in the morning, and before even brushing your teeth or doing anything else, you write down a few pages of free flowing thoughts. Even if you're thinking blah 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 blah, you write that down. So this helps as writers specifically, because one, it ingrains the skill, like the habit of writing every single day. And some of the days what you're going to write is going to be horrible, it's going to be trash. But some days you're actually going to find gold, and you're going to be like, wow, how was this first thought of mine so hilarious that I took it to stage and it got a laugh immediately. So the art of practice is kind of just getting into the habit of boringly doing something until you strike gold. Because yeah, my mom always says, actually, like, any job is 80% boredom and 20% what you live for. So we're all working towards that 20%, but there's a lot of monotony in the background that we don't get to see, which is actually 80% of the work.
That's really interesting. And speaking of the practice and your daily morning rituals, we have got one follow-up question from Mr. Nand Kumar from YouTube. And I'm also curious about this thing. What made you choose this line of work of being a stand-up comedian and also a content supporter for your organization? Like, how did you decide, okay, this is something which I'm going to do no matter what? What exactly triggered you?
Okay, so again, Aditya, I have to bring it back to the point that it's something that, I had wanted to do for a while. I remember, so growing up, I've always enjoyed, specifically, I'm talking about my experience. I'm sure everyone has different ones. But I loved public speaking growing up. And I mean, I had pretty supportive parents as well, which is a huge deal specifically. So, I would, like, from the age of 4, I've been used to the stage, and I've really enjoyed poetry recitation or like declamations, elocutions, debates, everything. I used to actively take part. So I think the public speaking angle automatically came. But how I mean, and I always fancied myself as being a funny person. So after college, in fact during college, I had even applied to a stand-up comedy competition or like inquired about it, but I ended up not going at that time. And now I regret it, because I'm like, if it was 1 year where I could have actually, like, sped up my career, because once I started, I realized that this is what I want to do. And how I kind of came about it is, it was something that I wanted to do for a while, and then the moment college was done, I realized, oh, I'm going to enter a corporate job. Which did not sound too appealing to me, because I was like, we grow up very anti-establishment, thinking, oh, we don't want to feed the system and go on a 9 to 5. But a lot of us do that, and like a lot of people enjoy it genuinely. So I mean, kudos to those people. But I think for me, like 3 months into working, I realized that, okay, I need extracurriculars. I need to do something that is just for me. So that's how stand up came about.
Great, great, great. And talking of which, since you mentioned about your family and your parents. And for those of you who are not aware, so just tell us a bit about your family, because this is something, with your permission, I would like to share. So, ladies and gentlemen, previously on our episode, we had invited Dr. Casey Haridas. And if you would see, both of them are doing fairly well in their chosen line of work. And the reason I got inspired by Sir was that at this stage in life also, Sir is so creative. He is doing so many things with his passion. So did something like that got brushed off on you, that you were like, okay, my father is in this domain and he's doing this also and this also, so might be I should also try? Was there anything like this in the background?
So I mean, mom and dad are both super ambitious and very accomplished in their own right. And one thing that I really appreciate about, which a lot of people in my our parents' generation, may not have due to various things, is that they were always very supportive of and very actively encouraging us to do what we want. And my sister took she always was very arts inclined, and she took humanities in 11th and 12th, and it wasn't even a question. Whereas I know a lot of households, kids have to struggle to like not take science basically. So I think both my parents are bank assurance backgrounds, but banking, marketing, insurance, but they've always encouraged us to do what we want to do. And that's how, like, my sister and I and my mom and dad, all of us have completely different career paths which is I remember even when we were kids, we used to read the newspaper in the morning and then like have heated debates as kids in the house about certain issues. So it's very interesting because we were always kind of encouraged to voice our opinions and things like that. So I think that is definitely something that is important. And a lot of my friends in startup now as well, they had to spend their initial, especially if they're younger, they had to spend their initial part of their career in stand up not telling their parents that they do stand up. And once they found out, eventually things are fine. But these are the kind of challenges that you do end up facing. But thankfully, very I was very privileged to have not faced that and had supportive parents from the get go. So that is super helpful. So if there are any parents out there, please encourage your kids to do what they want.
Wow, wow. That's really a heartfelt request to all the parents. And what I have also seen is, because one of the ideas that really struck me when going back to our conversation was that, Aditya, I'm pretty decent in public speaking, and that is where this whole idea of me being a stand-up comedian emerged. Generally, we don't see such kind of thought process among the youngsters that, okay, I'm good in public speaking, why don't I try? Because let's say public speaking and stand-up comedy are poles apart, where you feel that, okay, people would be listening to you respectfully in a stand-up comedy. As a stand-up comedian, you need to be very thick-skinned. You never know whether, again, reiterating, whether your one line would be booed or wooed. And so it was really something I got impressed in. Then the line which you just shared, that parents were highly supportive of you, and since a very young age you were encouraged, okay, go through the newspaper, what did you read, let's brainstorm it, let's agree to disagree, which also happens in stand-up comedy. You might say something which other person might not agree, but then there is this funny bone also that tickles after listening to you. So that's quite amazing. That's quite amazing. Now, one of the things which I would like to learn from you is, what does it take to build and run a thriving high performance? Like, tell us, who are the people behind the scenes? And is it a one man show, or do you coordinate with many people for your those? And typically, how many minutes or second is the gig actually? Just educate us, for the viewers who are totally unaware about the stand up circuit.
Okay, you're asking all the right questions, Aditya. So, firstly, let me just start by telling you something that one of my comedian friends actually told me, and I don't know if this is something that she came up with or she was quoting another famous comedian, but she said stand up is the closest thing to justice. Because when you're on stage, it's immediate justice. If you do well, you are applauded, and if you do badly, you are booed. And it takes a long time. So when you're talking about public speaking and stand up, yes, they are actually very different. The public speaking aspect just helped me, not be afraid of the stage and actually enjoy the stage. And the fact that I thought I was funny, and these kind of things, those are what contributed to me trying stand up. So and I remember the initial days of especially like in the first year, you learn so much. um, and in the first year itself, I remember my comedian friends also, we all used to talk about it. If you do a show and it goes badly, you literally feel like, oh my goodness, I need to quit. What am I doing with my life? I am so horrible. No one should listen to me. I don't deserve a mic. But then literally the next day you do the same set and it gets a laugh with the audience, and you're like, I am the best, I am the king. So it's a very up and down thing, especially in the first year. And I think that's applicable to a lot of things, like especially at the start of your career, for example, the little things seem so important, and they are in a way, because that's what shapes your experiences. So I'm going to keep digressing, but coming back to the point, that what it takes to build a thriving performance is, when you ask that is it a one man army, or is it like, people, stand up is inherently one person. So you do write, you basically are the writer, director, everything of your own special. You're the actor, you do your act outs, you do your writing, you decide, which, what your comedic voice is. So in that aspect, yes, it's all you. Like, whatever, if you're getting booed on stage, it's coming to you. If you're getting applauded, it's for you. So in that sense, it's a very lonesome kind of art form. But I would say that a lot of us, and I think I speak for a lot of comics, is that we tend to jam off of other comics, tend to, tell our jokes, test our jokes out with friends and other comics. And like what we do, we call it jamming, basically, where we, like for example, I'm in the Pune comedy scene, which is a relatively smaller scene. So all of us know each other and all of us are quite close. So we do tend to, oh, we tend to know each other's sets by heart. That's what happens. So when we hear that someone has done something differently, we're like, oh, that worked today, you did it really well. Or oh, that joke of yours, what if you add this tag to your punchline, that would work better. And then they do it and it does. So in that sense, a lot of us, like, while we do the writing on our own, a lot of the brainstorming and jamming does also happen when you're with people. Because ultimately, even though it's just you on stage, you can't do stand up on your own. You need an audience, and your audience reaction is the biggest thing. Because how do I know I'm funny? Because someone is laughing. I need at least one person as an audience. So in that way, it's very reciprocative. It's not like, it's not like another performance art where you're enough. You need that crowd of people to validate that you are, doing what you're doing. So that's what I would say in regard to whether it's on your own or with people.
And just tell us the typical duration when you are performing in a circuit versus when you have your own show. Just share with us.
So yes, so what you usually, I would bring it back to Amazon Prime and like Netflix, the specials that you see, whether they're coming out of India or wherever, they're usually an hour long. Okay, so the comics that you see, even though they get famous through their Amazon specials or through their Netflix specials, the fact remains that they've been grinding for the last, 10-12 years building that material. So in India, the turnaround time is much faster because we have a younger scene. Like, I think the Indian stand-up scene is probably only 15 to 20 years old max, whereas probably 15 years old, I think that's an upper limit. But so even the best comedians that you see have not been doing it for more than 15 years in India. Whereas in the US, for 15 years, you're considered a really young comic. You're like, oh, you're a newbie. You've been doing it for a short period of time. Because there, if you're doing it for 50 years, that's when it's like, oh, you're like, you're a proper comedian. You've been doing this for a living. So there are like advantages and disadvantages to that. But I would say that typically, just to give you an idea, we start out doing open mics, which basically is, in cities you have various locations, like maybe it's a pub, maybe it's a bar, maybe it's a coffee shop, maybe it's an actual venue where they have a stage and everything. And you go there typically and you get about between 4 to 5 minutes to perform your material. So this goes for everyone, whether you're a famous comedian or whether you're doing your first mic ever. That's how much time you'll get to start out with. So then you slowly build your material, and that takes time. So once maybe you have 5 tight minutes of content that's making people laugh throughout, then maybe a producer is going to be like, hey, why don't I you're doing well, why don't I give you a longer slot so you can test out more jokes. So it's just a process of trial and error, trial and error, and until you get, like, that exact tight set that you want. So that it varies depending on how much time it takes. Like a set could take anywhere between maybe like a week to
Oh,
12 years, because
wow.
yeah, because like sometimes it takes so long to get to that perfect punchline. And when you find it, you're like, oh, this is amazing. So a lot of comedians will even put some of their bits on hold until they find like the perfect way to deliver it. Or there are so many experiences that we have which we've done on stage, but then we're like, oh, maybe I wasn't emotionally ready to talk about that. And then you come back when you're ready. So it's just that, like, it varies depending on the time that you take to build material. But essentially the process goes open mics, then curated shows, maybe where you have open spots, which is you have a longer time on stage with the audience, and then you go on to maybe try 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour, and then eventually you practice your hour multiple times until it becomes a special. So that's how it goes.
Amazing, amazing. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you are enjoying. If you are enjoying it, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and also to comment into the part what is one thing which you are going to take away from our today's conversation. So, before we move ahead with a series of questions, we are going to take a small break, and on the other side, we are going to learn a bit more about Anamika and her craft. So, see you on the other side, ladies and gentlemen. And ladies and gentlemen, we are back in our studio, and Anamika is joining us. So, Anamika, we have got one question from our YouTube channel. One of our viewers asking, Sridhar is asking, are there occasions when someone has flinched your joke, and how exactly you respond to it?
Has what? Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Flinched might be flipped on your, I'm assuming flipped on your joke, and
Oh,
how
like
did you respond
liked
to
the joke. Well, that sounds like their personal problem. No.
it?
No, honestly, because I think, especially because we are such a diverse country, and I think it's not just India. This problem is universal. Whatever you say, you're gonna offend someone somewhere, no matter what it is. I could talk about bread and have someone be offended that I'm not talking about gluten-free bread. So I think you just have to make peace with the fact that your experience is not going to be the same as everyone else's. And it's not like, ultimately, in stand up comedy, we are just going for the joke. That's it. And we want to reflect our own beliefs. And, maybe those beliefs don't align with yours. But the fact remains that, ultimately we're going for the joke. That's what it is. So it's important to remember that. And a lot of people, hold comedian or like hold artists accountable for, oh, you said that, oh, you said this 10 years ago and it wasn't politically correct. Yeah, because the political climate was very different 10 years ago. So I think again, this is a very sensitive subject, but I think eventually people need to, like, even comedians or like even the audience will evolve as the craft evolves. So we just need to be respectful of that and realize that ultimately we're just going for the joke. So
Okay.
yeah.
So I would just like to correct what I asked. Sridhar just added a comment. Flished means borrowed without your permission. So,
Ah, okay.
huh.
We had
So
an
how do you,
unnecessary political discussion now. Oh,
that was
so
my next question, but anyways, you addressed it. No issue. So tell me, how do you find it? Because definitely you must be composing your thoughts in a diary or somewhere, and one fine day someone walks by you, sees it, picks it up, takes it away. Then how exactly do you respond to it? How do you keep yourself calm and nervous? Because it's like you are next in the slot, and it's like it's a deja vu. Hey, this guy is a mind reader. He can see. This guy just stole my joke. This guy just stole my line. How exactly do you respond to that?
well, this is where lawyers come into the picture, Aditya. But no, so I would say that since a lot of my content is, I mean, I don't have my content up online yet. I don't have videos up on YouTube that people can refer to and properly see. So I think because of that, like, thankfully, I haven't had to face this issue. But I do have a few friends who, have had to face this. And there's no way of, like, because a lot of us, what we do is we record our sets on our phone to make sure that to see the audience reaction and make sure we're improving, or like we write it down, or like we write it on Google Drive, so we have the exact date also that we came up with the joke. That's what usually happens, because that's how you kind of have to protect your intellectual property. But yes, when things like this happen, it's very devastating, especially when there's a way that you can't prove that this was your thought and your thing. But I would say that a lot of times, like, we have these things called first thought, second thought, third thought, which is basically the first thought is something that everyone would come up with. If I say it's, let's take the oldest joke in the book. If I say airline food, you're going to say, oh, it's horrible. That's a first thought. If I say that and then you say that, that doesn't mean you're plagiarizing. You're just, that's your first thought, right? So then there's a second thought, which is, when you think about a subject more, or like these kind, and you have a third thought. And I mean, I may not be explaining this the best, but you know what I mean. Ultimately, it's not unheard of to with even people, or people who roam around in the same circles, to actually have independently come up with the same thoughts. But I think what you do with it, and like the angles in which you present it, that will always be different, because you're offering your own unique perspective. So I would say sometimes I found that, in fact, a lot of our comedian friends, especially when starting out, we have our jokes, and then later on we see like, oh, this amazing comedian has this joke, like they've done it like years ago. And then instead of feeling bad, we kind of we do feel bad. Oh, I came up with this thought on my own, but now I can't do it because, oh, it's been done, and like, someone has thought of this before. So we have to drop it. But at the same time, you're like, oh, this amazing comedian thought about it, so I'm thinking on the right lines. so so I think, yeah, this was just a separate anecdote. But yeah, I do think intellectual property is something that you need to protect. So if you are an artist, upload everything to Google Drive. I think emails also count as, legal property now. So you can always, note down everything there, just to keep track of when you came up with what.
Great, great. And my next question is not exactly surrounding performance anxiety, but somewhere close to it. Like, we are seeing the new trend of comics. Like, initially it was offline, then Zoom, and now the new generation. And what I talk about the new generation, I mean the new presentation style is Instagram, where you are just using some filters and with some sound effect around it. Means you're very much fabricating it, and then you are getting likes and you are getting paid. So how do you keep yourself relevant?
Hmm. Okay, so that's an interesting question you brought up, because so I'll tell you what. So at the beginning of so stand up comedy is very different from, as in, it's a branch of comedy. It doesn't encompass all comedy. So I would argue that even Instagram reels, if they're original and people have done it and it makes people laugh, then that is comedy. It's not stand up comedy, but it is comedy. So I don't think we should disregard that, because it is a new media. And I think this also ties into the fact that we always disregard what teenagers do. So we always think about it as, and especially teenage girls, I think they have, like, as in, this is a social thing, but teenage girls have a lot, like, very less social capital, which is really sad because a lot of the cool trends that we see have been started by teenage girls, but we're really quick to dismiss it. You know what I mean? So I think, just to say, for example, social media, right? None of us comics over the last, before 2 years, before the pandemic hit, none of us had entertained the idea of performing online, because stand up, especially, is inherently an a me audience art form, right? So not having a live audience means that it feels like stand up can't exist like that. And even now, I would argue that Zoom shows do not feel like real stand up, even though there are people coming in. But you can't play off of the reaction of the audience like you can in real life. I can't insult an audience member and have an audience member heckle me. You know what I mean? So, like, the energy that you feed off of, that can only happen on live platforms. But that doesn't mean that, social media is irrelevant. That's something that's becoming increasingly relevant. So 2 years ago, we didn't actually, like, entertain this idea at all. But immediately, once the pandemic hit, we had, as people who create content and, want that thought flow and stimulation, we are desperate for an audience anywhere. So social media kind of became like a stage patch, you know so whenever we have a new thought, like now, instead of going and trying it on stage, I might do it on a Zoom show, or I might treat it as a tweet. And I'm like, oh, this tweet is doing well, so maybe I should try it more online, like in real life. So that's the way that it's kind of changed, the way we use social media. Because earlier, I don't think any, like, especially a lot of comics are introverts, they will not post anything until they go on stage. So, but now I think that's rapidly changing for sure.
My next follow-up question is, since we are speaking around the theme of independence, there have been times where you have shared something with the purest of intention and it has gone haywire. And I have read about few comics whose career ended because a certain set of audience misconstrues the entire notion of their delivery. So,
Mm,
how do you, because when you mention it's a one person show, it's not like you have got rehearsal or the producer is saying, okay, Anamika, let's do a dry run. Because of the intellectual property, you never know, you are saying it, and at the same time, someone else says your line. So, how do you exercise freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and be conscious also that okay, my this thought is politically correct, and it's not like a volatile thing which will just burst. I don't know, the next thing I know whether the goons are outside my door or there is a FIR against me. So how do you manage, because it's a high stressful environment, and we have seen some recent incident where people were highly intolerant and they just took it out of context, and
mm,
the comics were devastated. They were like, yeah, we were starting out, because you never know what is the intention of the other person. They might have some political agenda, or someone has some personal vendetta against you, and your confidence comes crumbling down. So how do you balance your freedom of expression and freedom of speech with a sense of security?
mm. Okay. So I think, oh yeah, sense of security is definitely, something that should be addressed, because I think ultimately it comes back to the fact that the audience and society as a whole needs to evolve. Like, something is like, an art form is not going to evolve until you give it space to evolve. So if you're censored from the beginning, how are you going to be funny? How are you going to explore new ideas if you shun the idea of exploring new ideas? So definitely, like, in this climate, it does become very, it's inherently risky to voice your opinion. But I don't think that's the fault of, I mean, it's not a fault of, I'll just say one thing, like, there's this, I feel like, just there's this one quote by, I think, Oscar Wilde, that kind of just sums it all up. I'm just taking the sentiment, not the exact quote, but it's that art is the interpretation of art is a reflection of the viewer and not the artist. So I can say something with completely different intentions, but if the audience misconstrues it, that's a reflection on the audience, not a reflection on me, because we've had, like, different, lives and different upbringings. So I think it's just a question of having an open conversation without making it a scary situation. because that's never the intention. Especially for comedy, the intention is always going for the joke, going for the punchline, making, like, speaking truth to power, making your voice heard. So those are things that we hold true, and that's something that's going to be inherently there, because whether you're joking about like politics, whether you're joking about religion, or even whether you're joking about your own family, someone somewhere is going to take offense regardless. Okay, we live in a big world. If somebody wants to take offense, they will, but that's more a reflection on, like, the interpretation of art rather than the actual art, if that makes sense.
Great, great, great. Because I was really thinking, with so many people with fragile egos and having some insecurities, you never know which insecurity might get triggered. And thank you for highlighting this. We cannot make everyone happy. Great, great, great.
It's very
So,
true, yeah.
so we have a question from Shavik Ghosh from YouTube, and I'm just displaying it. Shavik, thank you for always encouraging us. Ma'am, I wanted to ask you that India being such a diverse country consisting of diverse thinking, so does that confine your artistic freedom, since we see comedian are misconstrued so often? And this is just a variation of what I asked you.
Mm.
Like,
So that's
the
a
crowd and the scene of Pune, Bombay, Bangalore, Gurgaon is different from, I don't want to name any place because then it would come over to me.
but we
So,
know what you're talking about. So,
yeah, yeah, that thing only which we'll not talk
yeah,
about. Exactly. So, how exactly do you deal, and do you do any kind of research also? Because you never know, na? You are going to a place. Okay, I'm a stand-up comic. I'll go and I'll present. You never know that the audience is not mature enough, open enough, and you do not have a testing ground that you can stop one person and say, "Hey, come here. What's your reaction?" It's like it's showtime. Then and there, no retake, no cuts. It's live on ground. So, how exactly do you deal with diverse audience?
see, so the thing is, I think ultimately, you know, you have to do what you have to do. It's impossible to look at someone and tell whether they're going to take offense or not. It's impossible to look at someone and tell whether they have the same opinions as you or not. And it's fine if they have differing opinions, as long as they are not violent about it. You know what I mean? So it's just, I think that just goes back to the fact that we need to evolve. Like, we can't, stand up is not going to grow if we're going to be stuck on the same hati cheaty jokes. If we wanted to not take offense to anything, or if like, if Leonardo da Vinci was told, I know this is like a huge comparison, but that's what I'm saying. Like, if artists in the Renaissance era were told, oh, Renaissance paintings are horrible. I'm not a Renaissance artist, as you can see. But if you're told that, oh, what you're doing is morally wrong, then we probably wouldn't have had a lot of the great works and pieces of history that we look back on, and kind of define who we are as humanity, until, like, we're not going to have these kind of things if we are inhibited at each stage. So it's just a question of evolution, and it's just a question of being respectful and remembering that just because India is a diverse country, and that's a good thing. It's not a fault. Okay, so it's like, if I'm saying something and you don't agree with it, it's probably because we come from diverse backgrounds. And if you don't agree with it, that doesn't mean I'm wrong or you're wrong. It's just a question of being respectful of each other's opinions, and being like, okay, the whole concept of, even with the evolution of the internet, the trolling, everything, nobody can see an opinion that's not theirs and not comment on it. Regardless of who you are, you see something and you take personal offense to it because it's on your screen, right? It's not nobody else's screen. So it's just that culture of wanting to make sure that everything aligns with your line of thought, which is impossible, because how you this wasn't your line of thought before you were introduced to it somehow. So I think it's just a question of being open to discussions that are civil and safe, as opposed to going up in arms immediately when you think that something that you hold sacred is, or like, you hold close to you, is threatened. So that's what I would say on that.
That's interesting. And my next question to you, speaking of being open, is What have you become better at saying no to?
Oh, unpaid shows.
Okay.
No, because I think all like artists and freelancers would agree. Everybody wants your art. Nobody wants to pay for it, which is very sad because there's so much work that you put in. It's like being an entrepreneur and being like, oh, but you only did this, or we only saw this part of what you do. Or there's this really inherently amazing riddle or joke that basically went like, there's a story that goes. There was a ship that was broken and no one could move it, and then they called the best engineer or like the best technician in the country to come and visit, and he went and looked at the ship, and then he just hammered on like one part and the ship started working, and then he charged like $1,000 for it. And the employers are like, why you just hit the hammer twice, what does that? So he basically breaks it down. He's like, hitting with the hammer, $2. $998 for knowing where to hit. so so that's inherently what it is. And if you're an up and coming artist, know the value of your work and know how much you should charge for it, know when to say no to things. And one other thing I would also say I've gotten better at saying no to is things that I'm not comfortable with, or like things that stretching myself like beyond my own, even like if it's overworking, especially at the beginning, the first 2 years of stand up, you do every gig that you get. You're always looking for stage time, you say no to nothing. But ultimately, periods of rest are very important in order to especially create art, or like especially to just create in general. You need to take a step back, you need to self evaluate, you need to introspect. These kind of things take time and they're not tangible. So when you really need like time, or when you really need that um you know that energy and mental space to do things, it's perfectly okay to say no to other things if you're making room for something else. So that's what I would say.
Wow, that's really powerful. And just one last question for our today's show is: in the last few months, what new belief, behavior, or habit has improved you as a person?
Well, I will be honest with you, Aditya. I've not improved in the last few months. I've declined during the pandemic. No, I'm joking. But, I think like ultimately in the last few months, okay, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved you as a person? I would say just having a little higher self esteem. That is something that I think, especially pre-pandemic, and especially as a comic, especially as somebody who literally seeks validation for a career or is trying to do that. I used to tend to take a lot of criticism. Like stand up helps you have thick skin, but before I started, I would always take any criticism as like very seriously and as like a personal attack on my personality. But ultimately, if you want to be successful, you need to be a little thick skinned. You need to learn to accept feedback, not for it being a criticism on you as a person, but it being a stepping stone to leveling up as a person. So I think, I mean, that's just pre-comedy, but I would say like during the pandemic, I think one thing that I've gotten much better at is, like basically being able to take a step back without guilt, being able to, if somebody tells me that they don't that like if basically learning to accept criticism for what it is, rather than like something that I should be devastated and overthink over. So basically I think that's just a result of having a slightly higher self-esteem, to be more comfortable with yourself, understand that we live in a in a very diverse world, again, where not everyone is going to have the same opinions as you, not everyone is going to like you, and that's perfectly fine. Like it's something that it's normal. Do you like everyone in the world? No. So that's just how it's going to be, and that's how we all need to coexist and cohabitate. So that's what I would say.
Wow, that's really quite powerful, which you shared about having a higher self-esteem. Because not only with your current line of work, it's with almost every work. That if your boss compliments you, if your spouse or your partner or your friends compliment you, you feel better about yourself. If not, you are seeking validation, and having a higher self-esteem is really the key to being
Hmm.
comfortable in being uncomfortable. Because you cannot impress anyone, you cannot make everyone happy. It's like you know what you are good at and just going with the flow. So that's really amazing and nice
Actually, I
skill to
completely
share.
I love the point on validation, especially what you just said, because that makes a lot of sense. It's like a lot of us seek external validation, and that is actually a reflection of a lower self-esteem. Because if you had, the capital to look into yourself, like the, I don't know, emotional capital to look into yourself and be okay with your own opinions of yourself and seek internal validation rather than external, I think a lot of us would just be happier in life. So yeah.
So we have one follow-up question from Sridhar via our YouTube channel. Sridhar is asking, don't you think Hindi stand-up comedy has more acceptance? Or let me rather put it like this, do you feel regional content has got more acceptance? What are your thoughts?
So I would say that I think ultimately, like, again, comedy is comedy. So the language that it's delivered in, ultimately, it does strike a note. Of course, if you're someone who's grown up with, say, like I'm a Malayali, so listening to Malayalam stand up would evoke different experiences. Listening to Hindi stand up would evoke different experiences. Listening to English would. So I think ultimately, it's just a question of what resonates with you. So I think in India, of course, we are like a majority Hindi speaking country as well. Like a lot of us understand Hindi. So that's why it's doing well, because we have like a lot of, for example, like if we're looking at US comedy, which we've been exposed to for a longer time, that's all in English, right? So it may not resonate with us the same way as like our Desi comedy does, or these kind of things, or even English comedy, hearing it in like hearing an Indian perspective, regardless of whether it's in English or Hindi, basically feeling represented on stage or being like, yes, I've had that experience. And this is not an experience that's like come out of the US or come out of, the UK. It's something that's inherently come out of maybe me living in Bombay. I've had similar experiences like that. So ultimately, it's just about resonance. So I would say that it's not about, acceptance of Hindi more than English or anything like that. It's just acceptance of what you resonate with more. So I would say maybe because we're a Hindi speaking country, it feels like Hindi comedy is more accepted. But ultimately, it's just about what you enjoy listening to. But I would say that regional comedy is something that you should explore even if you don't understand the language, because it's just like film, right? We like watching films in different languages to see how the art form is over there. Like, yeah, so just expose yourself to a variety of things, I would say.
And Anamika, since you spoke of the word expose yourself, I have one question out of sheer curiosity. Like there is a term known as transferable skills. Whenever you are doing anything, you need to identify what are the transferable skills. For instance, you had mentioned that public speaking was initially one of your skills and you transferred public speaking to the stand up scene. Okay. And then creative thinking is also something which is also a part of your official job, where you
Hmm.
are the content creator. And then comical timing is something which can be transferred in having a sense of humor. So, what are the different skills do you feel are essential a person should focus on or polish upon if they see themselves in the comic space?
Oh, okay, that's a really good question. But I would say one thing that is universal is going to be self awareness, because
Mhm.
you're not going to be able to laugh at yourself or the world unless if you're in denial about who you are and where you live and what you're surrounded by. So
Mhm.
self-awareness is definitely like one skill that will take you far in comedy, I feel.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that counts as a transferable skill, but it's definitely something that I would say is very, very important. So yeah. When it comes to other things, I would say that like comedy is inherently about breaking form. So anything that is unexpected is like, or surprising, that's what evokes a laugh. Like you have your setup and then you have a punchline which you totally did not see coming. That's what evokes a laugh. So wait, I was going somewhere with this. I should have a punchline to this, but no. So that's what evokes a laugh. So ultimately, like, yeah. I think I've just digressed and now I'm in my own head.
No issue, no issue.
But
So,
yeah.
how do you polish yourself? Means you mentioned about time management also. Like Aditya, I had to go through a lot of special just to understand and to visualize myself in that scene. So let me put it, power of visualization also, where you are just visualizing yourself. Okay, I'm on the stage surrounded by people, or I'm doing a Zoom where people are there. So what are the skills you feel a person needs to polish in himself or herself?
Okay, so that's what you meant by transferable skills.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. So now I understand where I was going. Yes. Sorry about the brief delay, audience. But basically, stand up is about the unexpected, right? So, what you can bring to the table that is unexpected, that is what is going to favor you the most. You know what I mean? So if I'm someone who, I mean, of course public speaking is a transferable skill because that's something that has helped me here. Or I used to do theater when I was younger. That's something that has helped me here because like maybe if I want to do an act out in comedy. So I know a lot of musical comics who will bring their guitar up on stage, and it's like an experience that you haven't seen before, and they create a sense of magic that they wouldn't probably be able to with that, with just a mic and themselves. But it's like when they have their guitar or when they have their um, instrument or vocals, that's when you see the magic evolve. So ultimately it's about identifying what you can bring to the table, right? And one thing that like that's one thing that helps with this is just self-awareness and being real with yourself and understanding what you enjoy. And one thing I would say is ultimately do something that, if especially related to stand up or any art, do what you find funny or what you find inspirational or what you find beautiful, because ultimately that's going to be the thing that garners an audience, because you can't create something for an audience every time because the audience keeps on changing. You are the constant, so you're the one who needs to keep it entertaining for yourself so that it's entertaining for others. There's one of my other comic friends had said this which helps a lot in this scenario. I'm not sure if he's quoted a famous comic or if he was telling us on his own, but he says that when you're on stage and you're bombing, which means which in comedy terms means you're doing horribly, no one is laughing, okay, there's pin drop silence, but you crack one joke and then there are two guys in like an audience of 12 people who laugh. That's your real audience. Those are the people who are going to return to your shows. And that doesn't mean that just because it was 2 out of 12 people doesn't mean that you are bad. It just means that those two people are the ones who are finding you funny, and those two people are your audience. And with two people in each show, that's going to create an army. So that's what it is. Like everybody will have an audience, and ultimately you need to do what you find good in the art form, like what you love. So that's what's going to get you far, I feel.
Wow, wow. When you were saying that, expect the unexpected, the little voice in my head was saying fear factor, Khatro ke Khiladi, where it's totally like unexpected. You never know what task might be given to you, and you are particularly facing your fears. And public speaking is the number one fear that was rolled out by some popular magazine few years back. And even today, when I work with majority of the leaders, they say, Aditya, we know our job, but don't ask us to approach strangers and just to speak to them. And
Yeah,
when you
yeah.
said expect the unexpected, you never know what might happen. Be self aware. Even if you're speaking to two people, those two people are part of your tribe because they are listening with their heart and soul. So that was really something powerful. Great. And we have got a compliment from Sridhar via YouTube. Like your energy and articulation, Anamika, more strength to you and your tribe. So,
Thanks,
ladies,
Sridhar.
great, Sridhar. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you find value in our today's conversation, I would encourage you. Let us make this conversation viral, because the way I approached Anamika was I just saw her on YouTube. I went through few of her interviews. As Anamika mentioned, her lawyer has mentioned her because of intellectual reasons. She does not put her up shows on YouTube or anywhere else. So I was very particular. You never know, this conversation, this talk might encourage someone. This would inspire many of Anamika's tribe. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll request you to please type it in the chat. What did you like? Hit that share, subscribe button, and do support Anamika. So, Anamika, my last question, and Promise, this is the last question. How can people reach out to you?
Thanks, Aditya. So I'm very active on Instagram. So you can reach out to me there. My ad is anamika.haridas. And sometimes I'm funny on Twitter as well. So that's just Anamika Haridas. So basically, I'm very creative, but not creative enough to come up with a cool name on any of these platforms. I've just used my normal name. But aside from that, you can find me performing in Pune and Bombay if you're in that area or anywhere online. Um, Coming soon on a laptop near you. So, yeah.
Great, Anamika. Anamika, it has been a sheer pleasure to host you and to learn so many amazing things. And I feel the people who are contemplating comic as a career, as a space, as a second inning, this talk would really encourage and inspire them.
Thanks so much, Aditya, and thanks so much for having me. The series is really interesting, and you've taken people from really diverse fields, so that's something that's really commendable. So I would just say thanks so much for having me on here, and it's been a pleasure. You've asked very relevant and pertinent questions. Love the research that you've done as well, and it was just lovely talking to you.
Our show is totally raw, unscripted, live, so I don't have any retake or anything. And we have got a compliment from ma'am. She has mentioned very nice perspective on being a comic. Thank you, everyone, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks,
That
Meera
really
Haridas. Moms are always cheerleaders.
and this is something which I really appreciate because uh, if parents are able to understand, parents in their circle would encourage their peer that see, let your child live their life. If we as parents won't encourage our children, the world is out there to pull them down. The least we can do is to support them with our morale, with our kindness. And that is something which I share to almost all the viewers that whatever you do, have your family involved. Because I really enjoyed this conversation in the backstage where you mentioned that you would like to give the entire credit to your family, given the fact that your parents.
Entire credit. Come on, I deserve a little bit.
I'm at the majority of the credit, or a little bit around 50-60%.
I would go maximum 20%. No,
Great,
I'm kidding.
great, great.
But no, definitely. I think just having that influence of, I see my friends who have also had to do this in hiding, it's very, and especially as, a woman or a minority, you're always told that
Hmm.
you can't do this or you can't go out at night. You can't like, you're always told things you can't do, but like it's very rare to have that kind of support. And ultimately, like, if you're told you can't do things, you become your own cheerleader. So that's what I would say. And it's just a privilege to have people who are very supportive. So yeah, I would just encourage that with everyone, especially if you're planning to have kids or you have kids already.
Great, great, great. So, this conversation is going to be digitized in the media for ages to come. So, what message would you like to give to your future self and to your future tribe who would be watching this video of
To my
yours?
future self.
Whenever you are Googling yourself on YouTube and you come across, oh, yes, I remember this thing. So, what one message would you like to hear from the past about yourself?
I would just like to say that, hi, I'm about to turn 26. I think this is the last interview I'm going to give as a 25-year-old. So that's all I'm going to say on that. but, but I do hope, like, me and the audience are all thriving in the future, living our best lives. So that's all.
Great, great, Anamika. And Anamika, I would like to thank you from the bottom of the heart that taking out your weekend and sharing your life spices and secret formula for living life big style.
Thank you so much, Aditya. It was a pleasure being here.
Likewise. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We are going to be back with another amazing speaker. And if you enjoyed this show, do leave a comment, do follow us, do subscribe us. This would encourage us with coming up with more fresh content. So, see you on the other side. Same place, same time, same channel.